Welcome everybody to another episode of Project Spotlight by the .NET Foundation. I'm super excited to talk to Thomas from .VVM. Thomas, you want to say hello?
Hello. Thanks for having me here. Um,
Yeah, great. So let's just get right into it. So Thomas, let's talk a little bit about .VVM. I know that it's a very well-known project as a part of the .NET Foundation, but for new .NET developers or people that maybe have never had a chance to play around with it, do you want to give a quick intro to what it is?
yeah, sure. So DotVVM is an web framework for making websites and web applications. It's using the MVVM approach. So if you know MVVM from WPF or Xamarin projects, DotVVM will be very easy to start. Because the pattern is the same. You have view models in C#, and you are just using HTML as templating language for the views. And basically, you can use .vvm for two different things. One is, of course, you can just create new web applications in .vvm. And the second scenario is to modernize old .NET Framework web applications, because if you have been using, for example, web forms or the old versions of MVC, then you can also use .vvm because it supports not only the new ASP.NET Core pipeline, but also the old ASP.NET pipeline. So you can install .vvm into existing web forms application and start to migrate the application to .NET Core page by page, so incrementally. Yeah. Because these two technologies can run side by side in the same application. And this scenario is getting more and more popular. Actually, maybe most of the new users of .vvm are using it to modernize old apps, because the ability to write new applications using the MVVM pattern is also quite feasible, but it's not the only way how to make web apps. So, of course, there is a lot of competition.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. One of the things, so as somebody who hasn't done a lot with MVVM, the first thing that I think of when I think of MVVM is, like you mentioned, desktop applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you're building .NET Core apps or even .NET Framework apps, using WPF is like a big example, right? Like you have like this MVVM pattern, and for web you have that more MVC or even like client server type of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So what is a huge benefit to using MVVM for non-desktop apps?
Well, I would say that it depends on kind of application. I really
Sure.
love the MVC approach for public-facing websites, or for websites that are more presenting data to the users, because it's very easy, it's very straightforward. But if you are building some applications that maybe they shouldn't be on the web at all, maybe it should be desktop apps, but if they have
Sure.
very complicated forms with multiple steps, or where things are dynamically changing, and all you are dealing with is to have some very complex state that you need to maintain, then I think that MVVM can be a great
Sure.
way, because you are working with one view model, which can be very complex. It can have child objects, it can work with collections, and all those things together. There is two-way data binding, so these pieces of the view model can interact with each other. So if the user interface is complicated, and I am sure everybody has seen the screens with hundreds
Yeah.
of text boxes, and it breaks all the user experience rules you can imagine, but still there is tons of these applications, and some companies or maybe state government institutions are working with these apps. So if you have to build such experiences, then I think that that's a great benefit of MVVM approach.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of people have gone down this path with MVC, for instance, where it's
Hmm.
okay, I have a lot of views, and making sure all these views are, valid, making sure they all connect to each other, it can be very
Hmm.
challenging. So it sounds to me like MVVM kind of helps manage that complexity a bit better.
Yeah, yeah. it's I think that the main purpose for this is the area of line of business applications,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe some CRUD scenarios, like you have a grid with a list of
Sure.
records, and then you have a detail of a record, which can be very complicated. It can have multiple tabs or something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the main use case that .vvm was created for, because I'm running a software company and we have been building a lot of these applications, and we kind of uh, created .vvm for ourselves to have our lives easier. And then we said, okay, let's make it open source because it makes sense,
Yeah.
and other companies or people may benefit from it too.
Yeah, my experience with open source has always been like this. You are building something for work, or you're building something to better your life for whatever it is,
Mm.
and all of a sudden you're at this point where, oh, like this is an actual thing that people actually use. You know, you mentioned you built a framework because you were building the same apps over and over and over
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed with a lot of frameworks that exist in the .NET Foundation is that a very similar thing was done, right? Like, oh, I see this potential to not do the same thing over and over and over again. So other than that, like what is one of the main reasons where, like obviously you said you were working, you were building the same sort of projects over and over again. At what point in time were you like, hey, this is something that everybody can use? And then what was that process like of quote unquote open sourcing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically we needed feedback, because I was always worried that we are doing the things our own special way and it's not compatible with anyone else. And so of course we are restricted, we are isolated from other views. So
Yeah.
at the beginning it really started like that. I just wanted to show the project to my colleague, and uploading it on GitHub was the
Yeah.
easiest way. It was easier than just zipping it and send it via
Sure.
email. So that's and then I was speaking about the framework at some conferences, and I saw that people actually got interested, and they started using it. We received some pull requests, which we really didn't expect.
Yeah.
So that's how it started.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what I think that's really, really interesting, especially about .vvm, is that you have a very interested approach to add-ons, right? So if you look at the .vvm site, you provide a quote unquote free version, which is kind of like the
Yeah.
bare framework, and then you
Yeah.
actually provide more styled ones using more traditional styling, like Bootstrap, for instance, right? So
Yeah.
I'm interested in the decision around that, because one of the things that's very interesting about open source is that, one, it's very hard to make money. Two, people who are users of open source sometimes are very against the concept of paying for anything. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts have been and your feedback from the community included into that when you started to quote unquote charge for upgrades.
Yeah, so I think that it started very early. So we created the basics of the frameworks, and then of course, and also it was driven by our own needs. So in my company, we needed to build some project on Bootstrap, and
Sure.
we wouldn't need that commercial add-on we have created, because it's just CSS framework. You can just write the correct sequence or hierarchy of div elements with the correct CSS classes, and it will
Sure.
work. But it was ton of code, so we thought, we were thinking about this, and then decided, okay, so let's keep the framework open source and free, so it's available for everyone, and there are no restrictions. You can do anything with the framework. There's no limitation. But if you want to use it for something serious and you want to save some time, so let's make this a commercial, because it will help the framework to be sustainable. Because
Yes.
if it's only a framework designed for one company, it can never be sustainable, and everybody would be worried about, okay, what will happen in 1 or 2 years. But we found out that keeping the core of the framework open source and free is great, because it lowers the entry barrier for everyone. Yeah, and also people, students or people who cannot afford to pay for a developer technology, they can use it freely with no restrictions. And if you have a company and you want to use it for serious long-running project, then being able to support the project at least with buying some commercial stuff can help the project to succeed. So I think that this is the only model that could work in the long term. And of course, it's very difficult. We had to learn about how to do marketing. It's about documentation we have to provide, because if we are charging people for money, we would feel bad if we wouldn't give them some actual documentation.
People will not buy your stuff if it's not it's not very robust, right? I do think that's a great, as somebody who's built a lot of websites in my career, the number one thing that I am not a fan of personally is styling it. And it's, especially if it's a large app, putting CSS markers all through an application can be very challenging, and then all the testing that comes with it, right? So things like Bootstrap are extremely valuable in that sense, but you still have to configure Bootstrap. So I think it's fair and it's valid to be able to ask for a little bit when people want to use MVVM without having to do those stylings, right? I think that's totally fair. Go ahead.
My biggest problem with Bootstrap was that I was still looking in the documentation. I wanted to create, let's say, model dialog. Okay, so I go to the Bootstrap documentation, copy paste this very crazy long piece of code, and then do some changes in it. So what we can do is that you have one simple component, just model dialog, and DotVVM also comes with a free extension for Visual Studio, which gives you IntelliSense, because we have our own markup language based on HTML, but it's different than Razor, so we need our own extension for DotVVM, and it will guide you. It will tell you, okay, this model dialog has these properties, so it's discoverable. You can see just from the IntelliSense what the control is capable of and how to use it, because it's basically self-explanatory. So it's easier than go.
Funny. Like, do people do anything else other than just copy random CSS from the internet? Because that's all I do. I mean,
I'm doing it too, and Bootstrap is a great tool because I don't have any graphic or design skills. I'm very happy if I can sign myself twice and it looks at least similar or something like that. But I cannot draw. But with Bootstrap, I'm able to produce a user interface that it's not ugly at the first sight. So that's a great achievement of Bootstrap.
I mean, also I don't have a very creative side either. Like, somebody gives me a wireframe and I can do it very, very quickly, but the thinking around that is what's hard. And the ability to have something out of the box that looks good, like, I think that just makes MVM far more approachable for folks. I am curious about the community of MVVM, right? I know that a lot of people use it. Some people are very, very passionate about, right? I kind of get what your experience is, how the community has helped strengthen the value of .vvm.
Well, I had when we started this project and when we started being serious about open source, I expected more community involvement, like at least more submitted issues or maybe even some pull requests. But still, we are getting some, so it's not that bad. And what I have found out is that for many people, it's just too difficult to create a good pull request that can be just reviewed and merged into the code base. So we have been thinking about how to make it easier for the users. So we have a support chat where people can ask questions, because that's the easier way for them. And we are basically doing the support for free, but it's very helpful for us because that's the only way how to see how people are using the framework and what features they would like. And we found out that very often we are observe, or we are running into the same problems or have the same scenarios as the people who are using the framework. So it's a feedback, and it's also a validation of our own thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
So that's very helpful. Of course, it can be better. In every situation, you will find
Sure.
something to complain about. But we are getting some submissions from the community, some issues, so it's not bad. And I understand that if somebody is working on the project on the tight deadlines, these people just don't have time to clone the repository and to try to understand how it's composed, how you can build it, how you can run it, and how it's working internally, so they can fix the issues. So I totally understand that.
As somebody who has managed a handful of not .vvm big open source projects, is there's two kinds of open source users, right? Like there's the people who use it and want support, and there's people who want to contribute, either by opening issues or pull requests or just having discussions. The new discussions feature in GitHub is amazing, right? Like the ability to just have a conversation outside of issues and pull requests is super valuable. And I think one of the things that's great about .vvm especially is that the community is so passionate, right? Like whenever you see people talk about DotVVM, they immediately get very excited, because even though the community isn't as big as, maybe the MVC community, like folks that are really diehard MVC fans, but they know that there's enough of them out there and it's fun. So I think that's really hats off to the culture that you've built inside of that community, because people are very open and willing to have conversations. So what's next for .mvvm, right? Like, do you have a release coming up? Did you just have one?
We had a release of the version 2.5. It was in November.
Okay.
And next month, in February, we hope to release .vvm 3.0, which includes almost a year of work. So it's a big release with some big features. And one of the most important features is we don't have the final name for it, but we are calling it page modules. Basically, it's a way how you can better interact with the JavaScript. Because .vvm, if you want to start with .vvm, you don't need to know JavaScript at all. You can just use C# and HTML, because .vvm translates bits of C# code to JavaScript for you, and the rest of the C# code is running on the server. The view model is basically running on the server. But it was a little bit complicated if you wanted to use some third-party JavaScript widget or component or something like that. So basically, .vvm 3.0 will provide a way how to communicate with JavaScript from .vvm syntax, and also how to call .vvm functions from JavaScript. So this integration bridge between these two worlds. And still, you don't need to know JavaScript to use .vvm, but still, we are on the web, and I think that if you are building web applications and if you know JavaScript, you will be way better web developer than if you use some magic tool that will prevent you from using JavaScript.
Oh, sure.
Even that's also the way which is getting more and more popular today.
Yeah, I think, obviously Blazor being a really big example of like that concept of JavaScript interrupt, right? Like where if you need JavaScript, you can, but you don't need it as much as you used to do 3-4 years ago, right? Like a lot of things can be done because there's these amazing tools and frameworks that have been created, .mvvm one of them, that allows you basically the JavaScript's obfuscated from you in a lot of senses, because the amount of times that I've had to like Google or Bing or whatever, like how to do one very simple thing in JavaScript, like manipulating some DOM element or something like that, right? It's painful. And that comes as somebody who's been a JavaScript developer for a long time. I just don't remember. And the frameworks being able to obfuscate some of that complexity is super valuable for .NET developers.
Yeah, I agree. But there is other thing I would like to point out. .vvm started 5 or 6 years ago, because we were I didn't like JavaScript at that time, but there was a huge progress in the JavaScript world. And if you look at JavaScript today, I would say that it's completely different language. And if you look at what tools are available and how it evolved, I think that also the friction of using JavaScript in the .NET community is disappearing, because JavaScript made a huge progress when I compare it to how it looked like in 2014 or something like that.
No, that's fair. And JavaScript has definitely came a long way. When it first started, it was something completely different than what it is now. I guess my point is that for a lot of people, JavaScript is still challenging at times, and the ability to have frameworks that kind of do a lot of the plumbing or the boilerplate for you is super valuable. So as we're about to close out, Thomas, I want to thank you so much for being on Project Spotlight. We're super thankful to have you as a part of the foundation. And do you have any parting words?
Sorry?
Do you have any parting words? Sorry.
Oh yeah, so I would like also to thank you and thank the .NET Foundation for everything it's doing, because it's a great to be a part of it. And I would also like to encourage all the developers to engage in open source projects, because I think that that's one of the things the .NET community needs the most, to have more people involved in open source.
Yes, that's a great lead out. So one of the things that I want people to do is I want people to go to the .VVM website, the .VVM GitHub page, take a look at it, maybe open some issues, pull requests, or help Thomas out with the documentation, which I imagine a lot of folks probably would appreciate. I guess at the end of the day, it's projects like .VVM that make the .NET Foundation great. So I want to thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So thank you, everybody. Like Thomas said, in February of 2021, .VVM version 3 will be out, maybe. But if it's not, we'll definitely let people know about it, because I'm super excited to try out some of that project page modules. Sounds really fun. All right. Take care, everybody.